Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for staying around for my talk. Um, those of you who have not met yet, I'm David Guralnick from the International eLearning Association and Kaleidoscope Learning in New York, also from Columbia University, also in New York. So all my affiliations are on the first slide, and I'm going to spend some time talking about how to make the most of the resources that you have. What's the best way to spend the money and people resources that you have? And my background is in a mix of computer science and artificial intelligence, education, and cognitive science. And so I think that tends to inform my perspective, just to give you a little bit of background about where, how I'll be looking at these kind of problems. But first, I want to tell you a little bit of a story. This is a story lifted from a book by the Heath brothers called Change, which is about changing behavior. This is a story about consultants who are asked to change the way that they do timesheets. So there's a consulting firm, and the consultants reported their time every week using Excel spreadsheets. And the company decided, this is really inefficient. We're in modern times. We need to move to another system. So they implemented this new system, online system. They'd enter the information directly. It's going to save time. It's going to save money. It's going to do all sorts of wonderful things. And they rolled it out, and they found that the consultants were not using it. They simply just weren't doing it. They wanted to do it the old way, or they didn't really report their hours at all. So this is a problem. So the consulting firm thought, what do we do? So they put together a training course. So they ran people through, we've got all the consultants, they ran through, okay, they must not know how to use the system, that's the issue. They ran people through the training course, went back out, still didn't report their hours. No change, no noticeable change in behavior. And they're trying to think, what should we even do? They were at the point where they were thinking, maybe we need to start, enforcing this, put together some kind of, with quite a bit of cultural risk, I put together some initiatives that, look, you do this, you don't get paid if you don't submit your hours. But instead, they decided to bring in a consultant. So other than the irony of the consulting firm bringing in the outside consultants, this turned out to be very useful, because what the consultant found is sat down with a number of these people and talked to them about, why is it that you're not doing this? Why are you not entering your hours? And it turned out that they simply found the new system incredibly cumbersome. It was not well designed. They didn't like using it. They found it inefficient to use. They found it error-prone. They thought it was just painful. So this wasn't at all a training problem. So the time that they spent on training was of no value at all. And instead, what they did is they revamped the system, made it an online system that looked much more like Excel, and you could enter things quickly and easily, and everybody was happy. So the story does have a happy ending. And a couple of takeaways, and basically the big takeaway from this to me is that job performance is always the goal. It's so easy to see a problem, think it's a training problem or an education problem, and it's often not. And there's several ways that you can get to improve job performance before you invest in something. Learning in all its forms, learning, training, education. Just-in-time support, something that you can do just in time to help you do things. And improving processes. And so what they really did in this case was more process improvement than anything else. And all of these are roads to improving job performance. And as you're thinking about, how do I best spend my money, that's something to keep in mind. Talk about something else, which is there's a psychological study about resources and how people use them. Some of you may run across this by a group at Case Western Reserve in the US in the late 90s. What they did is they brought people in and divided them into two groups. Some people, there were in the room that they would enter, there were radishes, which are generally not that tasty, and chocolate chip cookies, which generally are considered tasty by just about everybody. One group of people came into the room and they had to eat the radishes. The other group of people got to eat the chocolate chip cookies. So you'd think that would be the end of the experiment. What are they going to conclude from this? This was not at all the end of the experiment. What they did after that is they then asked people to solve a very difficult problem, like pretty much an unsolvable problem. And the results were interesting. What they found is that the people who had eaten the cookies worked on the problem much longer than the people who ate the radishes. The people who ate the radishes quit much earlier. They gave up. They did follow-on studies to make sure it wasn't, because chocolate is the source of all energy, which may actually be true and not the point of the study. But they did further studies, and what basically they found, and the takeaway from all this, was that we have a limited set of resources, and they sort of apply to everything, right? So the people who spent time and energy, particularly emotional energy, resisting the cookies while they were forced to eat the radishes, those people didn't have the energy and the motivation to finish a problem that had nothing to do with radishes or cookies. So there's a limited set of resources, and it's interesting. So when you think about, again, what are you investing in, think about what you're asking people to do and how much it's going to take out of them and whether that's really the right investment. That goes into the total cost of anything that you do. There was a point to this other than to put more, chocolate chip cookies on the screen, which is actually dangerous at this time of the afternoon. So in general, how do we make the best use of resources? And to me, it's keep our eyes on the goals. Right, again, the goal is performance improvement. Anything that we're doing, thinking about how you might best do that. Let's talk a little bit about when we might want to invest significant resources in something. Before that, I'm going to tell you one more story. Here's something that happened to me recently. You reach a certain age in the US, and they ask you to get a vaccine for something called shingles, which is a sort of uncomfortable disease. It's really something that's considered uncomfortable. It's not life-threatening generally, but it's not comfortable. So this is one where your doctor, in my case, the doctor sends you to the pharmacy, you go to the pharmacy, and you're supposed to get this vaccine when I turn this age. And as I'm talking to the pharmacist about this, you say why you're there, and the pharmacist goes through a long list of all of the problems that you might have. Here are you can get this vaccine, but there are a lot of side effects that you might encounter. You might be dizzy, you might be nauseous, you might be fatigued, you might have severe muscle pain. You might have your shoulders swell up, and then she actually does this gesture so I can visualize just how much my shoulder might swell up. On and on and on. And it goes on for about 5 minutes until finally the question running through my mind is, how bad is it if you get shingles? Which is worse? And that's something, again, to keep in mind. Is the cure worse than worse than the actual disease in this sense? So when you're thinking about what are we investing in, just because there's a problem to be solved doesn't mean you have to solve it. Is it really going to buy you something? In this case, by the way, I did get the vaccine. Corporate version of the same story was a client that I once had in the retail industry who was having problems with money disappearing out of the cash registers, just the kind of natural thing they thought that would happen over time. It's a big retail chain. They had lots of stores. They would lose money. People would just sort of count in they didn't think anyone was really stealing. There's some theft, but mostly it was a mix of small mistakes and that kind of thing. So they decided to go investigate this and put together an initiative to investigate this and improve these processes. And this investigation and all the process improvements was a major undertaking. They spent $4 million on it. After they completed it, they did a study, and they found out that by doing this, they saved $3 million. So it wasn't really worth it in the end, right? So, you couldn't have predicted everything that was going to happen, but there's something to that. So some things to consider, some takeaways from this. What do you consider when you invest in what to invest in? Okay. One is just what learning and performance improvement methods best suit your audience needs and goals. This is always a major issue. What's right for your audience? What are the consequences of not investing, right? When I came down to my vaccine, I decided, the consequences of the vaccine sound pretty bad, but the consequences of not getting the vaccine were worse. What's the likelihood that you're going to have a problem if you don't do something? I think we run into this all the time, particularly in learning and development. There are problems all the time. The number of problems feels infinite. It's pretty close to infinite, right? So you've got to think long and hard about what's really worth fixing. I know my personal tendency is I see a problem and I want to go solve it, but it's not always the best use of time. Next one. If the potential investment is in some kind of training initiative, do you really need training, right? It gets us back to the story from the beginning about the consultants. Not only does everything look like a problem, but sometimes still things look like a training problem, and that's not the answer. Sometimes it's a process improvement, sometimes it's a performance support issue, sometimes it's something else entirely. Another thing is, are you investing in a high-impact area? Is this something that's really going to help the company? Is it worth it? We want, everyone's treated equally, we want everything to appear equally, but in terms of what's the overall impact going to be in the company? Some things are major. We work with retail clients. Customer service is a big thing. They'll put more money into customer service with the viewpoint that, this is really, they've done studies and found that, a lot of money goes away if you don't provide good customer service. There might be some things in the back of the store that aren't as important, aren't worth investing in as substantially. And then there's kind of just an overall big cost issue. What's the expected total cost of design, whatever you're doing? Design, development, implementation, maintenance, purchase if you're buying something, whatever it is, what are the costs? There are a lot of costs, and you want to look down the road. It's easy to want to do something that's going to have, going to buy you something in the short term and not think about what the long-term costs are going to be. Okay. Related to that, I've seen people invest in things that had kind of a short shelf life. And again, sometimes it really matters. Like, this is a major initiative, it's worth it. Sometimes you're investing a lot of money in something that's going to just be good for maybe a year or so, and it might not be worth it. So all of these, in my view, play into when to invest and how to invest. The last one is kind of the general question. What's the potential return on investment quantitatively or at least qualitatively? I want to talk about some key themes that underlie kind of any learning development initiative that you might want to invest in. This kind of gets into my introduction and kind of my background in sort of this mix of technology and education and cognitive psychology and how this all fits together. How do you best suit your audience? How do what are some themes that you might want to pay attention to as you go? And one to me is that skills are more critical than information. Right. There's a tendency to look at traditional school. David Keller mentioned this earlier in his talk as well, where you look at kind of the traditional schooling methods, and it's easy to just try to follow the models that you have and the models that you've seen. But a lot of those are very information heavy. Right? If you memorize some information, take a test, it doesn't mean you can perform the job. It doesn't mean you can perform any job. Okay? You certainly couldn't learn, you wouldn't learn to juggle by memorizing the 10 principles of juggling. And nobody would even think that's a reasonable thing. But the analog to that in a lot of companies is actually how we do things. Another thing to think about is user-centered design. You're going to design something for your audience. This little device here, some of you may remember from 2002, this goes back a long way. This is an MP3 player. This is one of the really early MP3 players by a company called iRiver. It was kind of a nice little thing in its own way. It was small and portable. Here's how it worked. If you wanted to put songs on it, you would hook it up to your PC, and it was only a PC, not a Mac. Hook up to your Windows PC. It would function like an external hard drive. You would plug it in. You would go download some songs. You would name them with a file name that would probably remind you what the song was when you saw it. You would copy the files onto this little drive, and then you would plug in your headphones and listen in the order that you had the files on, and that was it. So it could play music. It was useful if you were a runner. It was actually nice to have because it was so portable. But it didn't really catch on. Not long after, Apple came out with the early iPod. And what worked about this was not that it played different files. It played the same files. It played MP3 files. But the entire user experience was different. You didn't have to think about it from the standpoint of, I'm taking a file and naming it the way I want. You had the Apple iTunes Store. You downloaded music very easily. You synced it automatically. You just didn't have to think about it. So from a user experience standpoint, this was very, very different. And you could see the difference, right? You could see how people, this caught on. And everybody remembers the iPod if you were around during those times. Not everybody remembers the little iRiver one that I had. Another thing to think about is situated learning. People learn best in context. So if you're going to invest in something, think about, again, not memorizing facts that are going to be not necessarily applied on the job, but think about how you're going to be able to build something or buy something that helps people learn in context. Okay? Sometimes that means making it more customized so that they're facing realistic situations that are just like the ones they will face in real life. And new technology, and I'll talk about that in a minute, gives us a lot of opportunities in that area. Another nice theme is storytelling. Stories are memorable. You can tell people information. Again, if you tell people things, it's not so easy to remember. If you tell a story, it's there's more emotional impact. People are going to remember it. If they experience it, all the better. But again, there's a balance of time. Well, we don't have time to experience everything. I'm covering a lot in 30 minutes or so, and you don't have time to experience each one of these. If we did this right, we would build an experience that would take you months, and you would learn them all. But here, we're going to have time to do a little bit. But still, if you tell a story, it has an emotional impact. There are takeaways from it. People can think about what really, really matters, and you're paying attention, and you're paying a lot more attention than you might to just a list of facts. Another theme is moving away from training to more performance support, more things just in time to help you do what you want when you do it. And there's kind of a, in my view, there's kind of a continuum from process improvements to just-in-time performance support that kind of are augmentations to the process that help you perform it without really revamping it entirely, to training that's kind of just-in-time training. Hey, with mobile devices, there's so much more we can do with performance support. Related to that is the concept of workflow learning, learning in the context of the workflow. Here we see some people going over something just in the moment of need. Performance support plays plays into that, of course. As we go, as we move, I think there's a future that involves blending blurring the lines between what's been traditionally training and what's not training at all, but is simply part of how you do your job. As you're making decisions about, what do I invest in, you can create things. You can reuse them or find them. You might reuse something that you have already with some modification. You might be able to reuse it without some modification. Or you can buy something new entirely. They probably won't really be sweaters, but those are the images that we had. Any of those are possibilities. And those, you don't have the money to do everything. You don't have the time to do everything. The amount of time that you have matters. The amount of money that you have matters. All of these matter, and what you have, existing things that you have. So what content do you have that you might want to be able to reuse? Sometimes it's a content curation exercise rather than a development exercise, or sometimes it's a buying exercise. Another underlying theme to me is to fit your organizational culture, or I'd even say the culture that you want. We tend to think about learning and development initiatives as if they're about learning, or at least if they're about performance. But they go even deeper than that to me. A lot of times, you find that you have a subtle impact on the way people view your company. I've walked into companies where people started with very basic training, and they would have to just memorize and take a test. And their immediate feel for the company culture was, it kind of feels like school. I don't really want to be here. I'm not sure this is really built for me. And then we've gone into places where people start, and it's much more, it's engaging, it's experiential, it feels relevant from the beginning, and all of that impacts the way that they feel about the culture. So again, when you're thinking about what's worth a significant expense, we go well beyond learning and development. And one more related point is I'd say focus on the experience. Okay, it's not just content, it's not just information, it's what's the learner's experience going to be like, and that's a key point in terms of what's really worth the money. So sometimes it's worth a little extra to have the right experience. You might pick things that are sort of lower impact or just simpler and not, that you cannot spend on everything, but that's one thing that I would recommend. Another thing I'd like to encourage is creativity and experimentation. There's an old expression that necessity is the mother of invention, but sometimes it's the other way around. We hear stories from Steve Jobs and Apple. You hear about even the first iPhone, that it wasn't that they went around and had focus groups and people said, I want an iPhone. People may have wanted some of those features, but it was being creative, thinking about what can I do to reach my audience? What can I do to make my audience's job easier? And sometimes that's some kind of learning initiative, sometimes it's performance support, sometimes it's redoing the process, sometimes it's anything. But spending effort thinking about what you can do creatively is well worth it to me. And there's always a balance, again, on what you can spend, both in terms of your own time and your team's time and any outside budget. But all of those go into me. I want to talk a little bit about new and upcoming technologies and where they fit into all of this, because one of the great things about new technologies is it gives us the opportunity to do new and different things. And again, the question is, what do you spend on? What do you not spend on? And to me, it's not about the technology, but it's again about the experience and how you use it. The way I view learning technologies is kind of like this. So it's kind of what I see as an old model, where we had learning theory and technology, and kind of looked at in the middle of that is learning technologies. And a lot of it was redoing the way that you used to do things, but in a different method, right? Used to take tests, now you have online tests. Used to maybe, have a lecture, now you have an online lecture. Okay, and we still see lots of this. And what I'd like to start seeing more of, and I've certainly seen more of over the past several years, is really much more of a mix. We have learning theory, we have technology, we have user experience design, we have cognitive science. All of these are really blended together to produce the kind of technology we want. So it's not just take technology and apply it to existing learning theory. It's come up with new performance models, new ways to improve performance that take the best advantage of the technologies that we have. Okay, one of those, virtual reality, starting to become more and more mainstream. Virtual reality, among other things, great to me potentially for simulations. I've done a lot of work in that area. Put yourself in a situation where you're really getting to experience something, ideally with some coaching, guidance, and feedback, and it feels much more realistic in a VR setting than it might on a computer or elsewhere. So, again, invest, though, not just in the technology, not just because it's new and cool and it's VR, but think about what is it that you're going to do with it and what's going to be worth it. Is there going to be a payoff? I've also seen VR things that look pretty cool. They're kind of like 3D movies, and you can see maybe what a store looks like, and it's nice. But how much cost went into that, and how much do you get out of it? Augmented reality, we're starting to see more and more. And I agree with David Kelly's observation earlier today. When it'll be more goggle-based rather than handheld-based, and it's going to be a lot easier to take advantage of augmented reality. There are still some nice things, as you can see here, but you are focused on the phone in your hand. Even using something as simple as Google Maps, and this is the augmented version of Google Maps, you're focused on the phone in your hand. Artificial intelligence is coming. It's already here in some ways. It's coming in lots of different ways. One way it can really help to me, and one way that's going to be worth spending some budget on, is intelligent experiences. Imagine a different world where people have intelligent coaches that walk them through things, help them figure out what the right next steps are, help them find content that's interesting to them and other experiences. There's so many different things we can do. I could spend a whole hour on AI experiences, but to me, again, it comes down to thinking about what's the right one and where do you want to spend your money. The other side of AI these days is intelligent analytics. We're collecting tons and tons of data. Talked about big data a little bit this morning. And to me, the big thing with big data is as much what you do with it at the small local level. There's somehow the phrase big data comes out, and you feel like everyone thinks about how do you predict the masses, the behavior of the masses, right? How do you predict election winners? How do you do all that? But really, the advantage in learning is that you can personalize it more. The advantage is not necessarily that you just take a look at the major trends, but it's that you collect all of this information about people with, I know there are, of course, some privacy concerns, especially these days, but you can collect information to give people ideal experiences, and that's coming too. And to me, that's going to give us ways to, that will be well worth the investment. Another one coming up is holograms. And this is also interesting. Imagine a 3D projection of me. I am not a 3D projection of me, before you ask. But that's something that can help as well. Imagine a learn by doing simulation where you're interacting with a customer, something simple we do in retail all the time in video, and those are pretty valuable. But imagine if the customer appeared to be standing with you. Imagine if body language mattered, all of these things. And again, it's not just taking the technology that we have and figuring out how to use the same methods, but it's thinking about what can we do with it and what's worth the investment. Okay. All sorts of other things. We have smartwatches, we have 5G networks, we have foldable screens, we have each of these technologies. Each technology comes out. When you think about what to spend your money on and what to spend your time on, think about what you're going to do with it and what you can do with it to improve performance. It's so easy to get caught up in this is the next cool thing, and they are cool, but this is a field where there's so many opportunities to do something new and different with the technologies as they're emerging, and there are so many coming right now. Okay, quick summary, and there's some time for questions. A couple of key takeaways, I'd say, focus on performance goals. Don't want to lose sight of that again. When you're investing, you want maximum performance impact, keep the performance goals in mind. Another one is to invest in high-impact areas or initiatives. That's where there's more money worthwhile. What's the impact going to be on the company, on the employees? User experience and organizational culture are critical. It's not so much about content. It's about really what experience are you asking people to do? Is it going to improve your culture? Is it going to foster your company culture? Is it going to fit in? And then to be realistic about resources. It means everyone's, right? It means your team's resources, and it means the resources of the people who are going to be using a product. I've also seen products that were really great in and of themselves, but no one had time to do them. So here you build a great training situation, even if it's a great training experience, if it's for an audience that doesn't have, if that requires 2 hours and people can't grab more than 10 minutes without being interrupted, it's not going to help you. We actually had an experience like that with a client once, where we went in actually being asked to create what was going to be sort of a fairly immersive experience that was going to take a few hours. As for an audience of managers in a retail store, and one of the things that we found from talking to them for about 5 minutes was that you couldn't really talk to them for more than 5 minutes. They were going to get interrupted. Asking this group to take 2 hours and concentrate, it wasn't going to happen if they were going to do it on store time. There was no chance. They could hide in the back office and someone was going to find them. They could lock the door, somebody was going to find them. There was no way out. So all of these go together. So these are, those are some key points to take away. We've got a little bit of time for questions, so thank you so much. I'm happy to discuss anything. Thanks for coming so late in the afternoon, and if we have questions, I'm happy to talk about it. So thank you.
I just want to back David up. In my life, I have managed projects for over 2 million e-learners around the world. And in that time, over a period of 15 years, in that time I discovered that every project, there are always 4 critical success factors that are present in projects that work. None of those factors are technology, okay? And just to back you up, David, this, your other slide, the performance thing. Yeah. Focus on the goals.
I'm not sure.
In America, there was this brilliant guy called the famous basketball coach, Yogi Berra. Have you ever heard of Yogi Berra? He's very funny. Okay. One time he said to his team, he said, if you don't know where you want to get to, you'll end up someplace else. I see that all the time in e-learning. We don't define the objective closely enough. Now, for instance, one of the projects I did was for project managers in systems integration. We set the goal for the training to be 3 zeros. 0 overrun on budget, 0 overrun on time, and 0 overrun on spec. That was the performance measures for the project managers after the training. Now, here's the thing, it's called the Hawthorne Effect. If you set your goals and you set your measures and then you are seen to be measuring them, you will get what you are measuring, okay? It's called the Hawthorne Effect. In America, General Electric did a study once in a factory where they made light bulbs, and they wanted to see if productivity went up with the lighting. So they told the workers, we're going to be measuring productivity. They put the lighting up. Productivity went up. They put the lighting up some more. Productivity kept on going up. They got to the end of the experiment. They brought the lighting down. What did productivity do? It kept going up because that's what they were measuring. This is one of the cheapest tools you have. This costs you nothing. It doesn't cost you any technology, but it will help you get where you want to get. And as David said, the quality of the e-learning, the quality of the multimedia, the graphics, is less important than the way you manage it and the focus on goals. So set your goals, be seen to be measuring them, the Hawthorne Effect. What you measure is what you get. There you are.